Hey, good evening to everyone. It's 7 o'clock, and in the interest of starting on time, we'll start our business and want to welcome everyone to the regular business meeting of the Scott County Fiscal Court for 1/26/23, and I appreciate you being here with me. I'd like to ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Let us pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. I'd like to ask Ms. Hamilton to call the roll.
Mr. Hostetler?
Present.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Wallace?
Here.
Mr. Corman?
Present.
Mr. Ellison? Mr. Pratt?
Mr. Ellison is logged on. All right.
Dwayne's present.
Yeah.
Mr. Livingston?
Here.
Mr. Culbertson?
Here.
Judge Covington?
Present. Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. First item of business is to consider the minutes from our previous meeting. Those minutes were shared by email. Any questions or comments related to those minutes?
Motion to accept.
We have a motion.
Second.
We have a second from Mr. Livingston. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 5, transfers. Those transfers were shared in your packet via email. What questions or comments would anyone have related to the transfers?
No questions. Motion.
Motion.
Second.
Second from Mr. Wallace. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Bills and hand checks. Any questions or comments?
Did you want to say anything about the ARPA numbers?
Well, Kelly just mentioned that. I'm going to ask Stacy because she gave Kelly a fantastic
It was not fantastic.
It was better.
Last meeting, Michelle transferred money from ARPA to general, but it was the wrong amount. So we can't just correct it and put the difference. We have to put it all back and then do the correct amount for the transfer.
Gotcha.
So it's a plus and a minus.
Gotcha.
I hope that helps.
It does.
Yes. We have a motion.
Yes.
A second. Any other questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Mudrack, Chief Ward, Fire Department new hires. I can share with the court that a lot of work went into review of candidates. We were blessed with a number of candidates that had experience.
Right.
So I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, we normally go through a recruit process, but this time we thought we'd give trying to find an experienced firefighter a shot this time, and we had 10 individuals apply. We were able to interview 4 that we thought would be good possibilities. We extended contingent offers to 3, and we have 2 that have accepted and passed their CPATs and everything and are able to start. So the 2 I have to recommend to you for appointment are Mark Bennett at $13.51 an hour and Noah Covington at $12.80 an hour. They'll both are slated to begin work on February 13th if the recommendation is approved, and just glad that Mark Bennett has been a firefighter with us previously for a few years, and then he most recently was with the Georgetown Fire Department, and Noah Covington is coming to us from the Bourbon County Fire Department.
And I'd like to mention that there is no relation. I do not know Noah Covington.
Right. And so we have 4 vacancies right now. This will allow us to fill 2 of those vacancies. We'll have 2 remaining after this. And then we plan on looking at going into a recruit process next is our plan.
Questions?
Well, I was going to ask that question. Thanks, Jeff, about the update on staffing levels. Looks like you may have a 3rd candidate already lined up, according to that, if he passes
The CPAT exam. Yes.
Right. So that would.
I'm hoping to bring that to you next meeting if he passes. So
Right.
We'll see what happens.
So that would get you down to needing one.
Possibly.
If he's, yeah,
Right.
right.
So we'll have to come back and see what happens there.
Thank you. Motion, Judge.
Motion. Is there a second, Mr.
Second.
Wallace? Any other questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
And then in EMS, we have three hires. One's a full-time hire. Really, it's a rehire. It's Alyssa Karsner. She left us for a little bit, thought she would embark on becoming a nurse in the ER. I think she has decided she prefers working here. So we're welcoming her, we would like to welcome her back, as long as that recommendation is approved. If she returns, she'll return at the same pay rate she was earning when she left, which was the $12.47 an hour, and her tentative start date would be February 13th. So that's one of the three. The other two are part-time hires, Danny Coates and Marcus Stevens. They both would begin on or after January 30th, and the pay rate would be $10.93 an hour. A couple great things. Danny's has his BS degree in kinesiology, and he's been with AMR for a little bit over 2 years now, and then Marcus Stevens has been working with the Shelby County EMS program for a little bit less than a year. So.
Questions?
And to answer your question, Rick, this will leave them one person short in EMS.
We almost get there a lot, don't we?
Yeah, we're real close.
Thank you, Jeff.
Can I make a motion to approve all three hires?
Have a motion. Would there be a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Corman. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Chris Runyon, while we're on the topic of EMS, just to make a comment. Saw that our new EMT class got started and shared some information on social media. Could you just give the court an update and, how many individuals are in that? And
Yes. So 15 students. It's our largest class that we've had so far. 3 of them are high school students at ECS already, so continuing to grow them young. And we've got, how many guys we have? 4 county firefighters in the class as well. And then the rest are just kind of at large that want to either get on with us, or a couple have their eye on the local emergency department because they're starting to even hire EMTs there as techs in the ER. So
it's great,
good.
and great update, and glad we are moving that class forward.
Yeah.
Question for Chris or comments? Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
Next, number 8, airport board appointment. And, in most cases, sometimes we have to go and recruit individuals. And we have, in the past, had, it's tough to find folks that will have a willingness to serve on boards. But we've been in the habit, in the practice of posting on social media, trying to promote, opportunities to serve in the community, and I think we're using that tool well. We had several folks submit interest in serving on the airport board. I shared those applications with you all by email, and from feedback that I have received, there's been 2 candidates that kind of have stand out in respect to a couple of members of the court. And then I want to recognize Martin Thomas is here from the airport board, and I'm going to ask Martin if he would like to share input about a recommendation that he has made. And Martin, appreciate what you do and appreciate your perspective, and appreciate you being here. But we are blessed to have qualified individuals, and we also have Kelly had been in contact with Mr. Alan Halsey, and Mr. Halsey is here tonight as well. And I'll give anybody on the court an opportunity to give comment, and then ask Martin to share with the court, and then I ask Mr. Halsey if he would like to address the court. So any comments or questions from anyone on the court?
Well, just, I guess, I'd be interested in hear these folks, of course, but I kind of saw three people that,
Okay.
and,
And when I said two, that was
No,
two names that I'd received.
well, we got, I think, a total of six, I think,
Yeah.
and
And-
all of them have something to offer. That's
Oh,
pretty
there-
awesome,
there's no
actually.
question.
Yeah.
But when I said two, there was feedback from,
No, right,
Yeah.
right. I was just saying, I'm pretty impressed with how many people and the background on all of them is pretty awesome, so. That was it, Judge, thank you.
yes, sir. Mr. Wallace?
I would just say, Judge, that I think that when we have our interlocal meeting, we need to further discuss our interlocal agreement with the city and how that's worked out. We've talked about in the past appropriations. This really doesn't relate to our appointment tonight, but as far as moving forward, as well as these are all joint appointments, and
So I have met with Mayor Jenkins, and we have reviewed the applicants. Mayor Jenkins knew that we were going to have a meeting and that there was, discussion about it. Mayor Jenkins essentially said, we'll allow the fiscal court to have discussion and consideration, and then come up with a candidate recommendation, and then we'll take that recommendation to the mayor for their consideration as well. So this is a joint appointment, and along those lines, I have met with Mayor Jenkins about scheduling a interlocal meeting, and that is in the works for February.
that's great. It just is just one of those boards that's strange because we generally have a county appointments, we have city appointments, and then we have joint appointments, and they're all joint.
Yeah.
But we can all, that's just
No.
something to discuss
No.
moving forward.
But the main thing is that we have quality individuals that are interested in serving, and I appreciate that and such. Anyone else want to make a comment? Okay. Martin, thanks for being here, as I said earlier, and you shared a recommendation that I shared to the court, and they have all the information that you shared with me.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you all for giving me a moment to make a recommendation for our slot at the airport board. My recommendation is Paul Wade, and I've known Paul for over a decade. I've served with him in volunteer work and committee work many times. Paul has interest in aviation. He has volunteered for some of our air shows, which some of y'all may have attended. He's a solid candidate. Now I'm going to back up a bit and tell you why. The airport has a expedited freight program. So for those that don't know what that is, that's an airplane can come in 24/7. We have personnel meet the plane, offload the plane, load a delivery truck, take that to wherever it's going. Real important for manufacturing in Scott County. A part could break, they can get it in the middle of the night. Secondly, it's a pretty good revenue stream for the airport. Our program has a lot of unrealized potential. Paul has a lot of he's still working, he's still an executive in logistics. Relationships he has and the experience he has would be invaluable to build that expedited freight program to where it should be.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Thomas or comments?
I want to do some clarification to make sure that we understand completely what the requirements are for being on the board. I looked up the requirements for being on the board today, and what it says is basically that you're a registered voter in Scott County. And I would assume that you have verified, I mean, with all your alls, the current members that you have on the board, you verified that they are registered voters in
Yes.
Scott County?
Yes.
And so I assume that going forward, we would vet that process with anybody who we would apply.
Absolutely.
I did find that was kind of interesting that that's part of the requirements for being on the board, but that's what the ordinance says.
That was before my time, when those things were drafted, so I,
Yeah.
Appreciate that detail.
I had one quick question, Judge.
Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering, I read that letter. Are you just speaking for yourself, or did the board vote to?
no, the board doesn't vote for a
Oh.
recommendation.
Well, sometimes when we get, like, some of the folks send in.
We have discussed this, but we did not vote for
I
it.
just wondered, we get various things and make various appointments. Most of the time, a board has gotten together and making a recommendation. So I'm just checking.
Sure, we've discussed this, we've discussed the needs that we have, and the board's aware of my recommendation, so.
Good question, thank you. Mr. Livingston? Any other comments, questions? Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Appreciate the work you do at the airport. And then, Mr. Halsey, would you like to share
Sure.
a little information about your background?
Yeah, I can do that. My name is Alan Hawes. I grew up in Lexington. I went to UK, then I went to Georgia Tech, and then I moved to the Valley. And when I say the Valley, I mean the Silicon Valley. And I worked on semiconductors, so almost if you have a cell phone in your pocket, an Apple one, there's got a chip in it I worked on. In 1996, my wife, Jill, who grew up on Craig Lane, said, "Would you like to stay married?" And I said, "Yeah, I think that's probably a solid idea." Well, I'm moving back to Kentucky, so we moved back here and built a house on the Elkhorn Creek, just down here on Apple Creek Drive. And for the last 30 years, I've basically commuted to the Silicon Valley. I was an engineer. I designed computer chips. I built a software group. I worked on device physics. I was the chief information officer of Cypress, so I've worked on supply chain planning and finance and HR systems and, all of the things it takes to run a multi-billion-dollar company. I was promoted to the executive staff, and I've managed groups as much as 550 engineers. My company was acquired by a German company during COVID, and I had decided that I was going to retire. And so I bought an airplane with 0 hours. So on June 22nd of 2020, I took my first lesson. Since then, I've flown a little bit over 500 hours. I'm a commercial pilot. I'm working on my instructor license right now. I am the #1 piston airplane user of fuel at the airport. I'm at the airport, 3 or 4 or 5 days a week. I know all of the people there. I know the people on the flight line. I see the thing every day. It's just around the corner from me when I'm not on an airplane to California. All I care about, in one way, it's just sort of enlightened self-interest. My instructor told me that what I needed to do was fly to every single airport in Kentucky to make sure that, just to get looks at them, just to get a feel for them. And as I did that, I went in every single FBO. I looked at every single runway. I've been on all of the taxiways. I've talked to most of the airport managers. I've looked at their facilities. And, Scott County has what I would say is a top 5 airport. Maybe there's 1 or 2 that are about the same, but we have one of the best airports in the area in Kentucky. And I feel like that's an asset that's super important for our future. And, I know what to do. I know how to manage. I know what it means to run a budget. I know what it means to fly an airplane. I know the people on the flight line. And, regardless of what happens here tonight, I'll be around the next time or the time after that or whatever. I just want the best for Scott County and the best for my family and the best for all of your guys' family. And I think I have the right skills to help make a great place for us because, you know, like Martin says, it is a huge economic development thing. And, you know, I think if that's what matters, I've got the right skills. I built a 100-person company in Lexington, so I got it.
Appreciate it
All right,
very
thank you.
much. Mr. Thomas, can you share when the airport board meets monthly and
Meets monthly. It's 8:30 on, actually this past Wednesday, we have the same meeting scheduled with Scott County United, same day. It's everything on the same day. I don't know if that's the fourth Wednesday.
it's the fourth Wednesday at 8:30 a.m.?
In the morning, and sometimes we will have we'll notify to have an emergency,
Special call meeting.
Special meeting.
Yeah.
If something is pressing, we'll have to get some members together to make a decision.
Do your bylaws allow for virtual meetings,
Yes.
virtual attendance? What other questions?
I'll just ask, you are, just to be consistent, you are a citizen of Scott County and you're a registered voter.
I am indeed.
Well, you're eligible then.
Mr. Livingston, you look like you had a question.
No, I was just going to make a motion when the discussion's done, so.
Any questions?
So how many's on the board? I looked that up and I forgot.
We have, right now, we have 6.
I mean, it's
No,
not,
5. We got 5.
right, but you've got 6 slots.
6 slots.
Yeah. And that's counting you.
Correct.
I just want to make a comment that I know both Paul and Alan. I think they're both great candidates, and I just felt like Alan had a little stronger resume, and that's why I supported him. But you know, maybe in this instance we would do a roll call possibly, or whatever you feel most beneficial.
And Martin, I've got, you know, the board members and such. We know this seat is open. And looking forward, as Alan mentioned, you know, what openings will exist in the next year?
I think we have, I know another member rolls off in December, Steve Whitmer. That's the one I know for a fact.
Tom Coots.
Yeah.
Tom Coots.
So Steve and Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we
That's
have 2.
Tom's first.
Okay, well, Tom would be eligible to have
He'll
another
be
term
eligible,
if he
looks like.
would want to be. We kind of, yeah, Steve's on his second term. He's the only one I know that for sure that would be rolling
Yeah.
on.
Any other questions?
Well, I don't know if he rolls off or not, because we amended our ordinance a couple of years ago. Right, you can do up to 4 terms, so I'm not sure who might be rolling off in the near future or not.
Yeah, that may be a discussion for another night.
Yeah.
It still has to be voted on, so
Yeah.
it could.
Yeah. David, you said once discussion was over, you wanted to make a motion, so I'll
Yeah.
yield to you.
Well, Mr. Corman brought up an interesting concept of whether we want to do a roll call vote or not. And so out of respect for him, I'll
Recommend
defer
that?
I'll defer to doing that. So I'll go ahead and make a motion for Mr. Hawes to fill the seat on the airport board.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and we have a second, and there's been a recommendation for a roll call. So, Ms. Hamilton, just to let everybody know, we have, I guess we have 7 in attendance, but 4 votes would be the number that would carry the motion. So, Ms. Hamilton, if you'll call the roll.
Mr. Hostetler?
Aye.
Mr. Jones? Oh, he's not here, is
No.
he? Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
Mr. Corman?
Yes.
Mr. Ellison?
Might have some.
he just texted me. But he was,
Did you hear me?
I don't think so, but, I mean, you could go on, but he was asking about what's going on.
Mr. Pratt?
Yeah.
So is that 4? So that's enough to carry the motion.
My vote doesn't carry multiple votes with it?
It doesn't. It doesn't. So, with that said, appreciate your willingness to serve. And then Martin, we'll talk about upcoming openings, and Mr. Wade certainly would be a strong candidate for that. Thank you all. With that said, I will now talk about number 9, Parks and Rec Board appointment. This is a joint appointment between the city and the county. I've met with Mayor Jenkins. Mayor Jenkins and I reviewed applications. I shared those applications with you all. This one, in this case, though, Mayor Jenkins and I both felt that Michael Johnson would be a strong candidate to recommend. Mayor Jenkins recommended the City Council conditional on our approval tonight, and City Council approved Michael Johnson for that joint board appointment, but conditional on our consideration as well. Michael Johnson lives on Stockdale, a longtime native of Georgetown. Michael Johnson has experience in the Parks and Recreation field and actually serves with Lexington, Fayette County, Urban County government in Parks and Recreation administration. I would take comment or question from any court member about the recommendation for Mr. Johnson.
I'll make a comment. I think it's an excellent recommendation. I've known Mike for a long time, and I think he'll do a good job.
And there were the same situation. There were several excellent candidates, but Mr. Johnson's experience in Parks and Recreation and his, just being a long-time Georgetown native and such, I think that's why it merits the recommendation.
Yeah,
Rick?
Just a quick comment. I've only interacted with him very briefly, and it was over the reservoir property. And then, of course, he was here when we had one of the big discussions on the reservoir property and the future of it, and he was well informed, and I think he's a great candidate. Again, I was really glad to see some more folks that are willing to serve. It's sometimes hard to find, as we know.
Yeah.
So, but he stands out to me, and I'll make that motion.
So there's a motion. Would there be a second? Second for Mr. Corman. Would there be a recommendation for a roll call or just by consensus? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We will now turn it over to Rebecca Johnson and her staff. Thank you all for being here. I met earlier this week with Rebecca and her staff and discussed tonight's topic, and felt like it was time sensitive, and Rebecca made the request if we could move to put this on the agenda for discussion tonight. So with that said, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Judge Covington, members of the court. In short, I'm here to discuss the purchase of e-poll books, but I think there needs to be a bit more explanation than that, just a little bit more complicated. And I apologize, I feel like I've thrown a lot of information at you yesterday and then today. Some of that information changed, but as Judge Covington said, we are dealing with some very difficult time constraints. So if I could just back up a bit at the start of this discussion, Scott County voters are benefiting from the recent purchase of new voting equipment, and the fiscal court has approved that. And in the last couple of years, our voters have benefited from those new voting machines. So you might ask, why are you here talking about the purchase of equipment again so soon? Well, the explanation for that is that in the last election cycle and the first part of this election cycle, the state has had a contract with a vendor that has been providing the electronic rosters that we now use. We refer to these as the e-poll books. So the state has made the purchase and took care of the maintenance and so forth through a contract that they had with the vendor. And this was provided to all counties in Kentucky. Well, I would say very inconveniently on the timing, that contract is expiring on May 3rd of 2023. And as you know, we have a primary scheduled on the books for May 16th of 2023. We have been waiting as late as this week to see the number of vendors that were going to be certified and the RFPs in the bidding process for the state to establish contract prices. We received those just yesterday. We have 2 of 4 vendors that have potential vendors that have been approved. 4 have been certified, and as I understand it, from the information we've most recently received from the state, 2 of them have completed the RFP process. So that's the numbers we're working with tonight, and we recognize that we need to be placing orders for this equipment to possibly get it to our counties, do the necessary requirements for loading software or all of the housekeeping things that we need to do, including training our precinct officers on the use of this equipment. So again, to distinguish between what the purchase was then, that was our voting machines. These are what we now use as our electronic rosters. So that being said, with that contract ending, it has now become the responsibilities of counties to select from these certified vendors which vendor will be used, make a purchase. Of course, that purchase is funded through the fiscal court. Fortunately, there is a $12.5 million dollars that will be used to reimburse counties for that. That was established by House Bill 1, not only for 1 budget year, but for 2 budget years. So initially, the first $2.5 million will be distributed throughout counties for reimbursement for the purchase of the e-poll books. There is, I think, what's being referred to as ancillary equipment that works as a complement to these e-poll books, and that additional, any money that's left over from the first year of the $12.5 million can go toward that additional equipment, that complementary equipment. I'll explain a bit more about that later. And then that second year, the funding there can go toward that additional equipment as well. So that's the good news. There's some reimbursement, starting on a positive note. And now I'm going to launch in, I guess, to try to sell you the goods before I ask for the money. So what's been necessary in that, my staff and I have had to work on developing the election plan moving forward. And this was necessary because, you know, what are our needs? How much equipment do we need? What locations are we going to use for our polling locations? And in this, that's what I've presented to you. If you might want to go ahead and take a look at the map that you've been provided with. And I don't know if, Judge, were you going to
Yes.
put that on the screen as well?
Yes. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you for the large.
You're welcome.
See it.
I need it as well. All right, so so let me start with this, and then we'll get back to the needs for the equipment, the cost, and so forth. So what we are projecting here is similar to the plan that we utilized in 2020, when we used a concept of a vote center concept throughout the county. We used a vote center for our early voting, but then we used it on election day as well. Now, I would prefer to define that. I think actually a better way to describe the vote center, I'm using the term that we've become familiar with, what we were able to experiment with due to COVID. We as I hear some people say, there's some benefits that come out of this. I think that we, our Scott County voters, in the resounding favor of this concept, and also from the perspective of my staff, we found some benefits out of this. Some positive things did come out of some trying things in some new ways. So I would really prefer to define vote center. In my view, it really serves as a county-wide voting location, a county-wide voting location that can serve every voter in Scott County. So what you see that we projected here would be 11 locations in the immediate, establishing these voting locations that we would utilize for the May 16th primary and general in 2023. And then you'll notice there's one that has been projected for 2025, by 2025 adding a 12th location, and that, of course, we would be utilizing the Scott County Clerk's Office satellite office. So for obvious reasons, we would want to utilize that location. So 12 county-wide voting locations by 2025, but 11 of those being established immediately in our election plan. Now, I can address some of the benefits that I see in this. First of all, why this number? Well, we wanted to give full accessibility throughout the county. We wanted to be attentive to the needs of each district. And I feel like this, if you look over that map, I feel like we have good coverage for our county. I feel like it very effectively satisfies the needs of what our individual precincts would have satisfied. But now, the benefits that I see from this plan versus the individual precincts. First of all, as I said, serving every voter in Scott County. So no longer would any voter be turned away from any location because they've arrived at the wrong precinct. Any voter would be able on election day to vote at any of these 11 and then by 2025, any of these 12 locations.
And your plan would be to communicate via postcard that change?
That is correct. Certainly in 2023, probably a mailing in the primary as well as the general. We would like to send a postcard out to every voter to notify them of this change. It would be a simple message that we're putting out. All voters may vote at these 11 locations. That is, and I want to make the distinction, we would intend to maintain the Scott County Public Library, which since 2020, that has been our early in-person voting location. So we would maintain that for early in-person voting. However, on election day, these 11 locations would be available to all of our voters.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, of course.
Would any of this change when we do the apportionment?
Would this need to change?
Yeah, I didn't know it yes, the locations or they'll stay the same no matter what the reapportionment is.
That is correct. Because we worked very diligently to look at the logistics of where these are located, what could change would be precinct lines. Okay. So we will be redrawing precincts, but it would not be affected by these vote centers because every voter would be eligible to vote in any of these locations. And so that would not be a problem.
Just while we're on that, that is a 3-person committee of citizens that are 21 years of age, and those there are 3 voting members. You are a member of the committee as well. I am, yes. But you don't vote. And that work, that reapportionment, has to be done by May. And that reapportionment will not take place until after this primary. It really doesn't matter, but it won't really go into official effect until after May, is my understanding.
That's what I'm hearing as well. That's the projection that I'm hearing. The reapportionment, and usually it's reapportionment redistricting. Again, as a result of COVID, we've seen a reversal of that in this current phase of reapportionment. We've seen redistricting occur at the state level because elections needed to occur. Candidates needed to file. The election needed to occur. We needed to know, we needed to have that established to be able to move forward with the election cycle. So that did get interrupted by that. I'm glad that we're having this discussion about reapportionment, because this would also be a benefit of this concept. I can tell you that when we returned to individual precincts in this most recent general election in 2022, I'll give you one example. A precinct whose voting location, was at Royal Spring Middle School. That precinct, that location houses 3 precincts, has traditionally housed 3 precincts. One of those precincts is the largest in Scott County. It serves over 5,000 voters. If I'm remembering correctly, I think even over 5,500 voters. So that was difficult to vote those 3 precincts at that one location, because those voters had a choice of 2 locations. They could have come to the Scott County Public Library for early voting or election day, or choose to go to their own precinct at Royal Spring Middle School. That created difficulty in servicing that many voters, and also for voters who might have potentially gone there and stood in a long line and then found out they were not a registered voter of one of those 3 precincts, had to be redirected. Now, when I say long line, this is something I want to talk about in our discussion. A long line does not mean the same thing as a long wait. A long line, in my view, as county clerk, is a great turnout. It's a great turnout on election day. We like long lines. What matters is whether you have a long line in that, or a long wait in that line. And I would hope that maybe even some of you as magistrates or judge might have voted at our Scott County Public Library. It's been a model that we've had since 2020, and I think in Scott County we've had a great track record for that. So I'd like to know, I think a lot of people are aware, and it was put on the media, showed our long lines, but they interviewed our voters and said, you're voting more voters than any county in the region, and your voters seem satisfied. They say they're waiting a short time, 10 to 20 minutes at most in that line. Did you have a comment toward that?
Yeah, we actually voted at the library, and when we walked in, it was all the way out to the foyer, and I looked at my wife and I'm like, we're going to be late to where we're supposed to be going, and it took 15 to 20 minutes to get through the line for both of us.
Great. That's very much what I heard from many of our voters. That's part of what I would say is one of the benefits of a countywide voting location. We now have technology that we had technology that accommodated that then. The e-poll book was making our check-ins more efficient. But it's really not about how long the line is, it's about how many check-ins are at that facility. So what I'm projecting to you here is that we use our most optimal facilities that are spread out throughout the county. These are facilities that have the largest areas for voting rooms, initially the largest area for check-in, the largest area for privacy booths for voters to vote in, the most ample parking. So these are our optimal facilities, and it's not really about how many facilities we have as long as there's good distribution throughout the county so that we have good accessibility. It's really about how many check-ins we can accommodate and how many voters we can vote and how efficiently we can do that at each of these locations. So that's why I feel very strongly this is a better model for Scott County to move forward with.
And one item you mentioned to me, and your staff did as well, is with this model, you mentioned that you felt like you would have trained staff that would be available at sites to troubleshoot and address issues that in the current scenario that we have, model that we have, you can't have staff members at every site. So
Yes.
that's another
Yes.
piece of data
Yeah.
to talk about.
Yes, that's exactly right, Judge. What we were able to accomplish at Scott County Public Library was I would say, a well-oiled machine, a very efficient running process. But I was able to put my trained staff in that location, supervising the whole process. We currently have 46 precincts, 46 voting precincts in Scott County. Those 46 precincts have traditionally been accommodated by our 26 locations. I cannot possibly spread my staff that thin on Election Day to fully supervise and cover 26 locations. However, when we look at 11, and within the following couple of years, 12 locations, I can effectively put trained members of my staff to supervise at each of those locations. So we have a direct communication all day long, ready to respond to any issues that we might have, to make sure that each of those facilities are running very smoothly all day long for our voters.
So just to ask our magistrates, what questions do you all have about the proposal of, these countywide voting centers? Because I think the next question, just to move to the next question, is if they feel comfortable with this, then the next question is about the equipment that's required to support that. So just.
I had two questions, Rebecca. One, looking at my district, and I'm familiar with my district. That's why I'm asking this question.
Okay.
You want to have a polling place at Western Elementary, and which they've had it there for a while, but they also used to have it at ECS. So now you're combining two into one building. Is that going to create problems for as you're bringing Western Scott County and Southern Scott County into that area potentially? I know they can go different places. Are we going to now have issues with longer lines and longer waits because now we're going from two buildings to one?
Well, yeah, sure.
But along those lines, they could drive to Kroger, or they could go to.
I understand that, but,
Yeah,
but
not
people
to
are
not to Kroger. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they'll have a longer line at Kroger, I guarantee you.
Out of order.
You're gambling yourself.
Yeah, I mean, we need to run that by them. Or if they could do that back in their meat department.
Oh, my.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I would answer that in two ways. I would say no, that is not going to create a problem. This is why. When we had to maintain both of those facilities, which adds up to, has traditionally been 26 different locations. So not only does that take more equipment to set up a fully operational polling location at both of those facilities, that also takes, that duplicates the number of precinct officers that we need to have. That also is potentially a location or two that I cannot put a member of my staff for supervisory reasons. But what I would add to what the judge just said is that as Scott County voters, prior to 2 years ago, we all had one location to go to on Election Day, and that was our own individual precinct. And then in this last election, 2022, we now had two locations to vote at. That would be the vote center or your own individual precinct on Election Day. So you had two options. Now, I agree with what the judge said. Every Scott County voter now has 10 locations. So first of all, that will cause a dispersal of our voters voting at various locations. That will mix things up, but in the end, I think it ends up balancing out. We put some of every type of ballot in each of those 8 locations in 2020 when we had 8 voting centers on Election Day, and that's all we had was the the concept of the countywide voting locations in 8 locations. We put some of every ballot when we had printed ballots, because I'm going to go on and talk to you about print on demand. It's new technology that's a game changer for the whole concept of a countywide voting location. But at that time, we only had the option of pre-printed ballots. We put some of every type of ballot in every location. We really did not expect city voters to vote at Stamping Ground Elementary or Northern Elementary. We didn't anticipate that, but just to cover the bases, we put ballots every. You know what? Some of them did, because they used what was most convenient, what fit their schedule for that day or their travel patterns that day. So that's one reason that will affect that. But essentially, we were covering those 2 locations, but we can do that, I would suggest to you, more effectively in one location, because if we have the equipment, we have the setup, either of those facilities would give it, actually not. The gymnasium or a large cafeteria area that Western would have is more favorable. That's why we're picking these optimal locations with a room where we can set up. As I said before, it's about how many check-ins we have at one time. So, for example, if we had 2 clerks checking in voters at ECS, 2 clerks checking in voters at Western, we can now very easily accommodate 4 or 6 clerks checking in voters at Western. So, no, I don't see that will present
And I understand
a
that,
problem.
but the square footage doesn't change of where they currently vote at, even though you're going to put more people there. And so what I was going to say was, you might need to look at different locations. It might need to be in the gymnasium versus in the cafeteria, if you're going to bring more people over there, and just make sure that logistically, putting them in one location, I understand, but within the school, there might be a bigger area that which there's more square footage, so you spread things out.
Right, and that's what you'll see on our plan. We are selecting elementary and middle schools, our Scott County Public Library with the community room, and eventually our Scott County satellite office, which all would have these large voting rooms and sufficient parking for our
So
voters.
what other questions would anyone have about Rick?
So it looks like, with the exception, I guess, of the courthouse and the library, and maybe there's one other, you're basically using schools, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Throughout, with a couple of exceptions. And it looks, so that's where you pick Northern in the northern part. You pick Northern Elementary. It leaves a lot of folks up there, but there's probably not, even though District 1 is so big, or it has been land-wise, is because it's so sparsely populated. But, you know, there's been a lot of people moved in the area. My point is, there's a lot of folks up there in the northern part, but I don't know that you could find another place that has parking, has size. I'm sure y'all have considered that.
And 2 options that's been in the past is the fire station and EMS station, and then the Sadieville City Hall. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So District 1 previously had 2 I'm glad, let's talk about District 1, because that's a very good.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's do that. Let's do that. It's a really good example to talk about a lot of aspects of this, which would be relevant to the other districts. But let's talk about that. So first of all, we have to look at what facilities we have to utilize. So previously, District 1 had 2 voting precincts. One was Sadieville Clerk's Office, one was the fire station located there. We've looked at the logistics on this. If you see the current location in Northern as well, Northern was a location. So we're looking at Northern as being a countywide voting location now, and fulfilling the needs that the 2 precincts that we had would, effectively, those voting locations would no longer be in use. Northern is less than 5 miles from Sadieville City Clerk's office. It's less than 4 miles from the fire station. So you'll see that location is still within close proximity for any of the voters that used any of those 3 locations. However, I would suggest to you that, for example, if we, so Mr. Hostetler, tell me, even with the readers, this is over, let's look over on the far left. So what would be like an address over in the far left of District 1? Say
Well,
Frogtown Road,
yeah.
or
Or
so we're like
Frogtown
over-
to the north and west, and
Okay.
Josephine,
Scotts Mill,
Josephine.
Josephine, okay. So I would suggest to you that, well, first of all, Sadieville City Clerk's Office, it was a small facility, parking was limited. Fire station.
Actually,
had-
it's very limited.
very limited. The fire station, sometimes there was some confusion on where to enter the facility and some less than optimal
Right.
issues with using that as a polling location. So I would suggest to you that some of those folks that we've talked about in those addresses over on the far left side of District 1, I would also say to you, they may never have had a reason to go to Sadieville City Clerk's office or the fire station. But those voters may well now already be going to Kroger to shop for groceries that day. Not vote, but shop for groceries. So while they may have had to travel some distance to get to Sadieville Clerk's office and really not had a reason to go to that part of District 1, they may have already had reasons to travel in other parts of the county that day. But if they choose to stay within the district, again, the proximity to where they used to vote is less than 5 or less than 4 miles difference there.
So,
True.
So, we've talked about the concept. Does anybody have any other questions about the concept and how it could work and the potential of, the reality is in May there's a primary, and traditionally the May primary has not had super turnout. And what you're proposing would almost be like a pilot, and let everybody also understand that most likely this proposal will have to be approved by the Secretary of State possibly, correct?
It will, that's correct.
Yes. So this proposal is going to have to be approved there. If we do this pilot, and you will assess what went well and what did not go well and make an adjustment. That's what I'm hearing from you as well. Rick,
Well,
That's right. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think you've already said this, and I just want to clarify. So, this concept, which I'm kind of liking it. Nobody likes change most of the time, but anyhow, I get what you're doing, and I can see I think the public wants to get a hold of it. I think it'll help them because they can say, well, hey, I'm going to be over here doing this. I'll just vote there. But so this concept would allow you to put more staff actually in these precincts, because when I voted this last time, there was a glitch where I vote, and actually I think you had to send somebody out there, and it was something that was a little bit out of the ordinary. I don't remember what happened, but and I think you did. But the other thing is, what will that do about these precinct poll workers?
Mm-hmm.
Will this concept cut the number down that you need for that? Or how would that work?
Yes. So this, as I was saying, the 26 locations, I can't possibly cover that with my
your staff, right.
But keep in mind, my staff is already being paid with taxpayer dollars that day. So by utilizing them in each of these 11 to eventually 12 locations, I can put them there, as you just said, to supervise, and I feel like I can have much more effective, because they're there. We can only train our precinct officers. We have about 2 to 2.5 hours before each election to train our precinct officers. Even if we have new concepts or new equipment, this is about the amount of time that we have. So it is just very, very effective, as you noted, for me to have that supervision. Yes, it will cut down. I project it might even cut in half the number of precinct officers that we use. So from a conservative standpoint, there will be a savings. We've estimated, even in this first year, as much as $36,000 saved in taxpayer dollars in the use of precinct election officers. Also, keep in mind, if we are filling the 27 locations, the 46 precincts in 27 locations, we have to multiply the amount of equipment that we use in those locations. So we will save money. In the long run, we save money on equipment as well. We need to make some purchases now, and one thing I'm going to project to you is that we fortunately can convert some of the election equipment, the voting equipment that we're using, we can convert it to be able to use it with this print on demand, which is, as I said, was a game changer for this whole concept. So let me add another reason why we reverted back to individual precincts, why my staff and I made that decision along with the County Board of Elections to do that in 2022. In the 2022 primary, Scott County voters had, in the formation of our ballot, we had 181 different ballot styles that potentially needed to be distributed to our voters. We could not effectively have pre-printed ballots of 181 different styles and fill up to 8 or 10 locations with 181 ballot styles. We now have equipment that our current voting equipment can be converted to. So that would be our accessible voting machines and our regular scanners that you would have voted your ballot in. Those can effectively be converted to what's called a print on demand. It's called a Verity print, and it will print the ballot as it is required per voter. Now, this, as I said, it's a game changer because we can now establish that in these locations. And there's cost savings in that, in converting that equipment we have. So don't worry that the equipment that we purchased to maintain the 46 precincts in the 27 locations, that we won't be able to utilize it. We will. We can do a conversion, and we can now have the abilities of print on demand. I also think there's greater accountability in this, because rather than having 181 ballot styles in pads pre-printed to remove and issue the ballots from, now a voter will sign in, and along with that voter's check-in in the roster, they now will be, the proper ballot will be requested. And so because it's more of an automated process, there's less chance of a voter being issued the incorrect ballot. So we won't have a precinct officer selecting from among many different styles. And in the traditional precinct, it might be up to 6 different ballot styles or so forth. But in a county-wide vote center, it would be all of the potential ballot styles that we had, which is what we did at Scott County Public Library. We had all of the ballots there that had any one of those ballots had to be distributed. But now that will map, that number, that machine is counting the ballot it prints, and it has counted the voter's signature. So we have accountability with each and every voter's signature on the roster with each ballot that's printed at the time that occurs. So that's another advantage.
So in our packet, there's 2 options.
Well, actually, it's a combination
Okay.
of all 3 that you see.
I don't think there's any other questions about the countywide voting location. You know, what would be your recommendation for a purchase to accommodate and have the equipment on hand to serve your plan? Which one would be, what would be your recommendation?
Okay, and just following up on your comments earlier, it is not a requirement that we come, that I would come on behalf of the Board of Elections to get the fiscal court to approve the voting plan. It is State Board of Elections that would approve that plan. However, in my view, I would like to get the blessing of the fiscal court initially on the plan, because the fiscal court will be responsible for the funding of it. So I feel like I want our fiscal court to be confident and comfortable with the voting plan that is hinged directly on what you will be funding for our elections moving forward. And so that's why I'm discussing the voting plan with you, and that's why it's certainly my hope that the fiscal court will have a blessing on the plan, and then the funding will follow. So now let's take a look at the funding on that. Okay, so what you see in front of you, and okay, so if you look at the $96,525, that is the estimated cost on the e-poll books.
I don't see,
Looks like this.
all right, that one,
It says no ink at the top. Okay. Okay, that's the initial cost that we're projecting on equipping the 11, currently the 11 locations with the e-poll book. Now, keep in mind, this is it's a requirement that we purchase the e-poll books for whatever number of, polling locations we decide. That's based on the plan. But equipping each of our voting locations is necessary. We no longer have use of the equipment that the staff was contracted for. So this is a requirement. Keep in mind, though, that there will be maybe half or more of this cost will be reimbursed. Hopefully more than half will be reimbursed by the state in that $12.5 million for 2 consecutive years, as I was indicating. So that would be the basic cost of the e-poll books. Then if you look at the quote that comes in, I think at $61,010, that is the estimate of converting the voting equipment that we already have into the Verity print. So that's the print on demand for the ballot.
So Rebecca, when we bought that, and we paid a lot of money for that.
Yes.
We bought it, so it's now subject to being converted, but that's not anything that we did. We made a mistake on. That's something that the state has come in and said we have to do that. Is that? Should we have bought it a different way?
I have to say no to both. It was not a mistake in the purchase. The technology was not there in 2020. So this is new technology. The print on demand was not there. It was not available. It was not an option. It has since been developed. So no to that. There was no mistake in the purchase. We were using individual precincts or polling locations then. And if you recall, as I said, we had the 46 precincts, the 27 locations. But I'll go back to what I said about print on demand being a game changer. That made it not feasible. Before we had this technology, in my view, it was not feasible to do widespread countywide voting locations. It now is with this technology. So,
but we don't
fortunately,
have to convert them, and we could get them print out, and you wouldn't have to pay for the conversion.
We do have, well, this comes at a savings versus buying new, the Verity print. So if we were to equip these locations that I'm projecting with all newly purchased Verity print, we would have voting equipment that was extra, that were basically spares or overage that we would be storing. So we wouldn't want to do, in my view, it's a conservative measure for using the voting equipment that we had when the technology was not there to convert it at a lower cost, at less than half the cost of buying that equipment outright. Okay, so there's
but you
equipment.
Understand my concern. Like, we just purchased this a few years ago, and now we're having to convert it. That's the concern.
Yes. Do you want to come?
Amber, would you come?
Yeah. I know we're not replacing it, but
So we're still using the same type of voting equipment. It's
yeah.
just what
I
we
just
have
wish we
left
could have
over.
used it longer without having to convert
We're
it.
still using it.
No,
What
but
we
you know what
have
I'm saying.
left over, we're going to convert into a piece that goes along with that other voting equipment, if that makes sense.
Right. We're not converting everything that we have. So we have 2 types of voting machines. One is the accessible. we would call that the Verity Duo. That's the type that a voter can use, and it would print the ballot, and it would print a marked ballot for the voter.
That's
who
for
had
ADA
needs.
compliance.
Yes, that's for ADA compliance. That was required in every voting location. So that was one type of voting machine that we purchased. So that'd be the Verity Duo. We also purchased the Verity Scanner. That's where you would have voted your ballot that you marked, marked with a pen in your privacy booth and voted in that. We will still use each of those types of equipment in every one of these locations. So we will maintain the purchase we've had, but we purchased it for 27 locations. If we go down to 11 and 12 within 2 years, what I'm saying is we can use some of each of those pieces of equipment, and I think it's 11 of the Verity scanners and 16 of the Verity Duo. We can use that equipment, and our vendor can convert that into Verity Print, which will print the ballot. So it's not that dissimilar, but if you consider that Verity Duo, when it's given the correct code, it would print the ballot for the voter, but it would print it marked with the voter's selections. So what this Verity Print will now do is just print the ballot that the voter needs to then be able to mark, to then cast the vote in the Verity scanners. So we would retain as much of the equipment that we used unchanged to utilize in these locations. What we didn't need, because we're reducing the number of locations, we could convert. So that's good news. It's not wasted, or it's not just sitting in storage. We would, at a lower cost than just buying that Verity Print machine outright and buying additional equipment, we would convert some of those two types of voting machines that we've already purchased. I hope
David?
that's clear. I know it's kind of complicated.
You want my version? In the private industry, and with technology now, this is going to be an every 3 or 4 year process. We're going to be spending money to upgrade, to convert,
Sure.
to do whatever we got to do to keep ahead of the game on the locations. So,
The big thing,
I mean, that's
No.
the way it's going to be going forward, just because of where we've moved into it. That's nobody's fault, other than technology has caught up.
but the number one thing that I say that we've done in the right direction is at every site there is a paper ballot, and that's there, and that was the big point of what we invested in previously.
Right.
And this still provides that.
1,000 times, yes.
And Chad, just so.
Kenna, would you come up?
We
And we'll make-
can't move towards the voting center concept with 181 ballot styles. The only way not to do that is to do a print-on-demand concept and have that equipment.
So,
Does that make sense?
yeah, so,
Yeah.
the real question for us, because ultimately the Secretary of State will approve the plan. We're just trying to get in the queue the purchase of the equipment to support the plan. Now, if they come back and say no, then we've got to adjust. My question to you is if in this primary, if things look like we need to adjust, like if we need to put something at another site, whether it be north, south, east, or west, to accommodate a need, I would like to have a commitment from you all that you'd be willing to make that, adjustment on the fly, so to speak, in between elections or such. But I think your plan has been well thought out, and you've tried to be considerate of moving people through and giving them more opportunities and such. So am I correct that your recommendation would be for the $61,010 and then the $96,525, and knowing that there's going to be a reimbursement on just the $96,525, hopefully up to 50% possibly?
I think close to 100% on the 95,000. They're supposed to e-poll book. There's,
So
one vendor quoted it as one big package, the other vendor quoted it as separate pieces. They have committed to doing the e-poll book reimbursement with not all the extras. I'm not sure how they're not gonna reimburse as one vendor did as one big package. Those are the things we're not gonna know until they,
but there won't be any reimbursement on the 61,000
possibly in the second year.
in the second year, possibly.
Okay.
There's
So,
a lot.
yeah, it's, okay, so, first of all, okay, I know it's been a lot for us to
We've been doing it
try to-
some days, it's a lot.
yeah. Okay, so again, if you're with me on the same page, that in order to move forward with this concept, which has many advantages, and now with the game changer of print on demand, just since the last 2 years, we wanted to take a conservative measure to say, hey, how can we turn the equipment that we purchased for 26 locations and utilize it in now what we feel we only need is 12 and can actually do this more effectively. How can we do that? We can convert some of that to what we need to do the print on demand. It's not quite enough to cover that, so there would be the need for purchase of some of those, the Verity print system, and which is the 5283. And so, and then there, I don't want to belabor this, but there are some other components to it. They come at a much lesser cost. We're talking about the main equipment, but there's a thermal receipt printer that the e-poll book signals what ballot style is needed. It's a receipt that's pulled off. It's scanned. That tells the Verity print to print the correct ballot. Again, there's much more accuracy in this for voters being distributed the correct ballot. It's a clean system. There's accountability. So there are some different components, but that's what we've comprised for you is all of, let me just sum it up by saying this. Being conservative, converting what we can, making sure we don't have any voting equipment that sits in storage, not utilized, and then purchasing only what we need to equip the 11 locations and eventually the 12. So that would be the combination of the three of these. So this is all the equipment we need, what you see here, for 11 locations. Now, I would I have some calculations here. If you wanted to go ahead and purchase the equipment for the 12th at this time, which I would recommend because the reimbursement funds have been discussed for the next for the 2 consecutive years. We don't know beyond that whether there will be that reimbursement. So it would be my recommendation that you go ahead and purchase for the 12th at this time. I would add for that, adding that 12th location, which we would want to be able to function in a way that would replicate the Scott County Public Library. So that would be what we call like a major center that would have the multiple check-ins.
So just everybody understands, the 12th location is the proposed new sheriff's office / county clerk annex. Did everybody know that? Okay.
Correct. So in addition to the 3 quoted amounts that you see here, so you can add up the 3 of those. I'm rounding, just slightly rounding up to make sure we have a buffer. Of course, any dollars that we don't utilize will remain there in the budget at about $220,000. Again, consider that half or better of that is anticipated to be refunded or reimbursed by the state. I would add another $57,500 for that 12th location, which we would want to be have enough equipment to be a major vote center, which could be there at our headquarters within 2 years. And that would come in at about, my estimate on that is $277,500. So that would be the blanket amount that I would ask for the funding for this. Some of it, Mr. Wallace, is a requirement. That's the e-poll books. The complementary equipment, now is the time to purchase it because there is the expectation of reimbursement not only for the e-poll book, there is that specifically, but there is for the ancillary equipment that would accommodate that as well, of any voting equipment purchase within the funding for that in these next 2 years.
So let me stop.
Yes.
Just so everybody's aware, none of these funds were, to my knowledge, were in the budget for this year's cycle, correct?
That is correct.
So we will have to amend the budget with DLG along with this action. And would you like to add anything to that? Because is that correct?
It may be able to be done through general fund transfers,
Okay.
depending on the amount of money.
I want to clarify one thing.
Yes.
I want you to understand that
Yes.
it's like buying a new car, and then you go about 4 years down the road, you need to change the stereo out because the new one that you bought 4 years ago. That's the aggravation, and it's not anything that you all have done. It's just
I
the
understand.
aggravation that we have to convert it. Yeah, exactly. You've got to do software updates and all that stuff. But I will say this: the print on demand makes complete sense, except from a guy who deals with printers and copiers every day. They are unreliable, and so I would hate for us to get in a position where we can't print them out, or you know what I'm saying. And I know that they'll assure you up till perpetuity, but
We will always have a Plan B
Okay.
at every location. We will always have pre-printed
So you're gonna have
ballots
some.
in a certain quantity that we
Yeah.
will keep accountability for, but we will always have that. If any printer goes down in any location, we will be ready to distribute pre-printed ballots. So that's already been discussed. We will not forgo that.
Yeah.
Because we need that Plan B in place for that. If I could just project one more thing, and talking about the reduction of the locations, if we wanted to very similarly replicate what we have now with 46 individual voting precincts, I won't be projecting it tonight because these numbers are new to us as well within this last day. Remember what I said about the check-in sites, the number of check-ins? That's what's key here in being able to accommodate what we've done previously with all those locations. So by compiling our resources, we're stronger and more effective. But if we wanted to replicate what we're doing now, if I added one more check-in station, so of what we've discussed in these quotes, so one more check-in station, which is the clerk and the issuing of the printed ballot, okay? If I added one to each of these projected locations, which would be two of the major centers, which would be the Scott County Public Library, which we have a secondary location in that facility that we could utilize. So we have a second voting room that we could utilize and a second parking area. And then also at the satellite office that will come in 2 years. If I added to those, if I added 2 check-in stations at each of those major centers, and I added one more at each of the other centers, and as you'll notice, all of those are geared for 2 check-in stations, except Royal Spring, which was 3. If I added one more or 2 more to each of those locations, we would have 43 check-in sites. So if that is at a greater comfort level, I think now is the time to upgrade to that. Now, I need to, if this gets approved for the funding, we need, as a staff, we intend to put this order in tomorrow because we are facing that time constraint before the May 16th primary. And all the counties are doing this. 120 counties are doing this. So we've got to get our order placed to make sure we get this equipment in a timely fashion. But I would intend to come back to you next Friday with the numbers that would require 1 or 2 additional check-in stations, and we could essentially have 43. That's practically measuring the 46 individual precinct locations we have. So for Scott County, we could say we have the same number of check-in sites for voters that we had with our individual precincts. But in the long run, after this initial purchase, we're saving dollars on equipment, we're saving dollars on precinct officers, and we're stronger and more efficient. But I think that would be the most optimal situation. And that can be approved or not in a separate measure, because I don't feel that we need that equipment for this upcoming election. But that would be projecting that toward a presidential or countywide.
Thank you.
So I'd like to present you with that at a future meeting, and that order would not have to be done immediately, but it would be nice if we could tie it in with the reimbursement phase.
Okay. Rick?
Okay.
Just, what did you say that estimate was in savings on the poll workers? You had a
Am
number.
I correct in saying 36,000? But yes, we've run those numbers and we're looking at 36,000 a year. And precinct officers pay
So
alone.
you would still have the early voting at the library.
That's correct.
So if we don't do all the additional stations you're talking about, it seems like to me we'd still have an advantage we've not had in years past by still having that early voting.
Yes. So that also causes a disbursement of voters at
Right,
each
I'm talking about like the
location.
actual,
Yes.
the
Mhm.
day most people go to vote, election day.
It alleviates some of the volume on election day. It
I
does.
assume it was pretty big this last time, wasn't it, the early voting?
It was. Our biggest day at Scott County Public Library, our highest turnout was Election Day. And it was at the Scott County Public Library. So actually, that's good data to provide for you. Our highest turnout was at Scott County Public Library, which was our countywide voting location. It was on Election Day. But yes, the 3 days of early voting certainly alleviated that. And our highest day, we voted 1,500 voters at Scott County Public Library in 8 hours. That goes to show you the efficiency and the effectiveness of a countywide voting location. And I think a huge benefit is that no voter can go to the wrong voting location. Every voter can go to any location and be able to vote.
So your recommendation would be for $277,500 to purchase the required equipment from No Inc. and Harp Enterprises as presented. And would there be any other further discussion or a motion?
I'll second.
So we have a motion and we have a second.
And I have a question.
And any other questions or comments?
Yeah, so on this, I was trying to follow this email. I'm assuming these are both on the state bid contract or are we doing these procurement through local? That's a yes or no?
That is correct. That's through the state procurement process. The reason I provided that is because I provided you a day. Remember I said this information is coming to us, if not just on a daily basis, an hourly. We are seeing some changes. So I provided to you a day ago some estimated numbers based on a vendor that was already certified, and as we understood it, it was the vendor that the state had used previously in the past few years. They were already able to give us a quote. Apparently, they have not completed that RFP process. So while we had their price list and we could look at that, they had not completed that process. So that email from the attorney at State Board of Elections was indicating to us that we now have 2 that are certified that have completed the RFP process. So what we did in the update, we plugged those numbers in because those are numbers that we actually can use.
So what was the total?
$277,500 to complete a purchase from No Inc. and Harp Enterprises for the required equipment
Will that
presented.
also include that 12th location? Is that?
Yes, the number that you said, the
277,500
277,500 included the purchase for the 12th
That
location.
gets you 12
Yes.
with the anticipation of adding the voting center at the new Sheriff County Clerk Annex. So we have a motion and we have a second. Are there any other questions or comments?
Where are we at on the budget? So what does this do for our budget? And you can take the reimbursables and
Yeah,
we'll be
this will come out of reserve for transfer, and I'll have to ask Stacy. Like, to my knowledge, we have not tapped into that.
So the county clerk's budget will be over the budget?
Yes.
Yes, by far, and we were, I don't even want to go into it now, we'll come back another day.
Go ahead and step up.
We will have to come back.
Kenna
on
manages
and
that
update the
budget.
budget for the upcoming election. We will be short in that line item because of the cards we sent out that was not budgeted in. We're going to be coming back and asking, nothing to do with this, just a general, we send those cards out again. lots of things. So we don't have those numbers in yet. I'll get to you. I want to say this. We have been reimbursed already $100,000 from our initial purchase we made on the machines. We just got that in May of 22. So
Is that
that's when,
165?
and it's $100,165 that has already been come back to us on the initial purchase of the machines. And Cam will probably have to get with you very quickly on contracts that have to be reviewed. Because they gave us a deadline, a 2-day deadline. Not much time. But.
All right, I'm good.
Does that satisfy?
Yeah.
The motion actually just to approve the purchases of the necessary equipment.
Yes, the $277,500 to include the No Ink proposal, the proposal from No Ink, and the 2 proposals from Harp Enterprises that were presented.
Will we make a amendment at some point? There's no money in this budget for this, so are we going to amend the budget?
We'll talk to
Okay,
Michelle,
I'll do a transfer once you get the invoice.
Okay.
and then so we've got a motion, we've got a second. One more time, any other questions? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion passes. Thank you all, and we will navigate this forward. I do want to say that I had originally planned to have some additional follow-up discussion with the detention center proposal, but we had question marks about our magistrates. We had some conflicts and some timing issues, and so I put that off, and I communicated with Jailer Broyles that we would put that off. I did tell Jailer Broyles if anybody was here that wanted to make public comment, like every meeting we always have, anybody's always welcome to make public comment. So we will move. I have no new business. Does any magistrate have new business?
Can you have Jailer Broyles get us copies of the contracts that he has with the existing jails that we house inmates at, whether it's Clark County or Woodford County, or there was one, can you request that?
Can you make note of that for me, and we'll do that? Yes, sir.
Yep, thank you.
Anything else? I will move to anyone in our audience that might want to make public comment or such. Yes, sir.
Quick on observing what she was saying. I worked the post, and I worked in Shelby County, and I was off work, and when people knew what I was doing, they were saying, you should have came down here and worked because ours was a mess. And we only had like 2 or 3 problems which had nothing, and it's not perfect, but the public didn't see our mistakes because they did help us fix them real quick. And one of the mistakes that really got to people was we told them to fill in the whole box. Well, they would check, and it wouldn't take. It wasn't our fault. It wasn't their fault. It was the public's. And we only had about 12 of those, so it wasn't bad. And
Thank you for working.
Huh?
Thank you for working.
Oh, yes, you're welcome. And you're talking about it would take less workers, right? So it means I might be out of a job, but don't take that for...
Hold up, you're a veteran, though, I think.
No, I'm not. But now, don't take that for granted, Scott County, because a lot of counties did not have enough workers. And even though there was some might not have came back with less workers, I think that's going to be a problem in the future. So if it's going to help with that, I think it's going to be great. And your pay was very competitive because I heard what other people's paying also.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Any other? Yes. Yeah. Any other public comment or any other comment? JR, you got any comment? What about any weather predictions or anything? All right. Good
Hey,
deal.
Judge, you brought up JR. So I've had a couple calls from folks that are really happy with what's gone on down on Longwick with the county and the state partnership and cleaning up around that curve. And I just wanted to express that to JR, and because I told the folks said, well, who did that? And I said, well, it was a combination. It was partnership with the state and
Joint road safety project.
Yeah, and the property owner was worked with us too.
1,000%. Right. 1,000%.
So that's what I told folks. But I want to let y'all know that it's been noticed. In fact, when it started, I got a phone call, and they're going, "What y'all doing down there?"
Anything for the safety of the public.
Yes, that's right. Now, JR, I thought you'd get up and say something in favor of Rebecca's plan because you got to love his. Instead of going to 26, you're going to 12. So, anyway, is there a motion to adjourn? One second. Any other questions? All those in favor of adjournment? We are adjourned. All right. Thank you all.